Okay, here we are. Welcome to the Teal Shirt Report podcast. We talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars, of course, North Florida entertainment, the SEC, the NFL. We cover the gamut. Jaguars still 2-9, coming off the bye week. They should have had a come to Jesus meeting, perhaps. I think that's good for a lot of people, including the Jacksonville Jaguars. 2-9 on this season. Well, I do want to say this. I did see some things on social media that kind of alluded to the fact that the Jaguars were trying to fix some internal problems with the team. Coach Doug Peterson did not really go into the details, but let's see if we see a different Jaguars team coming up this next game. And as far as I'm concerned, it's even a little too early to be talking about this Sunday's game. It really is. I mean, maybe in the next podcast we'll get to it, but 2-9, the season is shot. The only question I think a lot of fans have now at this juncture, they got about 3 questions. When will he be fired? When Trevor Lawrence play again? And who's fired first? And that's a key thing. Or Trent Baalke. Now, if Trent Baalke's wanting to keep his job, he's going to want to fire Doug Peterson. And then maybe, well, he can hire a new coach and things are hunky-dory for Trent. I don't think you're getting to the root of the problem unless you fire general manager Trent Baalke. Do you really want him going through another draft? I think whoever the scouts are, when you bring in a new GM, it's going to be a whole new slew of scouts. New sets of eyeballs, and this franchise needs offensive linemen, my opinion. Brian Thomas Jr., a nice playmaker. He's got a chance to be potentially a number one wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Taking a look at the NFL scoreboard. Well, there were some interesting games, and I looked at my football pool, and that's it right there. All the games on the pool. There they are. I got the scores on there. And we started out in college football with the hopes of Indiana getting under the 13.5 points. They did not. I even said during the podcast, man, all of a sudden I feel like Ohio State will win this game by 20 points. I should have gone with that feeling. Sometimes you get two different feelings about a game. I went with Indiana and the 13.5 points, and I came out losing. Ohio State won that game 38-15. Miami of Florida 42, Wake Forest 14. The Florida Gators, my Florida Gators 24, the Ole Miss Rebels 17. I saw some pictures on social media about how Billy Napier had jumped off the hot seat. Now Lane's on it. 3 losses for Ole Miss. No, they're not going to be in the playoff. And Lane has this way of his teams fading or kind of burning out at the end. He's had good seasons, and then at the end, they just kind of fall apart. Ole Miss, I'm talking about. Coach Billy Napier and the Florida Gators are right now at this juncture where I thought they had a shot to be. 6 wins going into Florida State. If they can win the Florida State game, that is 7 wins, and that's what I said Billy Napier needed to keep his job. We do know about 3 weeks ago that Scott Strickland, the GM, came out and, he said Billy's going to keep his job. And I think that Coach Billy Napier earned the right to keep his job. About the middle of the season, his YouTube is an interesting thing. Things are always moving. Looks like the internet is hanging in there right now. Sometimes the internet will fade a little bit. We got good internet here. I mean, we've got Xfinity, Comcast. I think it's 300 megabits per second. It should be good enough to do the podcast. But internet is a funny increment. You got to have it to do these podcasts. You got to have it to go online, and we do have it. We're sponsored by Saucer Realty and Capital for your real estate needs in North Florida. Whether it's home, residential, business, or commercial real estate, it's Larry Saucer at Saucer Realty and Capital. There's a link to Saucer Realty and Capital's website on our homepage at bigjreport.com. The Teal Shirt Report podcast is brought to you by Saucer Realty and Capital, the madmaxmix.weebly.com, and Mad Max's Wednesday night internet radio request show. Also by Lake Eufaula Hits and JC's Thursday night live from the pub show at Lake Eufaula Hits. Those are the sponsors. So the Jaguars are 2-9. If you're going to fire the GM, you got to do that first, because the new GM, they're going to hire the new coach. Now, is Shad going to let Balky do this thing inside out and let him fire Doug Peterson? Man. I know that Balky likes Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien's a college coach at Boston College now. He interviewed him during the process before Doug Peterson was hired. Bill B is out there, whether he's going to be a coach or maybe a GM, maybe both. I think that's a colossal mistake. I think Bill B could come in for a year or two and retire again. And I think he's at the end. Man, Bill, you won a lot of Super Bowls, Bill B. It's time for you to hang them up. They might, if you come back and you screw it up, they might not change that trophy, the Lombardi trophy, to call it the Belichick trophy. Well, it's going to always be the Lombardi trophy, I believe. College football, Kansas beat Deion Sanders' team. Kansas 37, Colorado 21. I picked Colorado in the pool. Colorado was favored by 2.5 points. They looked good the week before. They've looked good in some of the games. Kansas at home, man, looks strong. Kansas 37, Colorado 21. Notre Dame covered the 14.5 points easily. Notre Dame 49. Florida Gators 24. Ole Miss Rebels 17. I think Billy's off the hot seat, at least for now. I think the seat's still a little bit warm when you're 6-5, but Billy's going to have a whole off season, more recruiting. The Florida Gators already are picking up players flipping from other schools, and it looks like on the surface that Florida can gradually turn this thing around, and actually on the field they have. The UCF, the Tennessee game, the Kentucky game, the Georgia game were 4 straight games. There was a bye week in there in a couple of places, and I think Billy turned it all around during the bye week before the UCF game. And there were 4 straight games where the Florida Gators were well prepared. It wasn't like a Willie Taggart situation where when Florida State came on the field, they just didn't seem to be prepared. Billy Napier had this team really prepared on both sides of the ball, special teams for the most part. And Florida's also been winning some of these games too, just like they beat Ole Miss. Man, that was a huge win. Ole Miss was ranked 9th in the nation. Florida got them at the Swamp. Florida Field, baby. Florida Gators 24, Ole Miss 17. Miami of Florida, the Hurricanes 42, Wake Forest 14. Nobody knew. And Miami's ranked 8th. They're probably going to be in the playoff. I think Miami's got 1 loss. They lost to Georgia Tech, right? Georgia Tech is 7-4. They won't be in the playoff, but they get a crack at Georgia, who will be in the playoffs. 12 teams in college football getting in the darn playoff. So we told you about Notre Dame 49, Army 14, Kansas 37, Colorado 21. A game that I picked Arizona State to beat BYU, and BYU was actually ranked higher and than Arizona State. Arizona State's like 21st in the nation. BYU's 14th. And BYU was hanging by a thumbnail to try to get into the playoff. And I don't believe they're going to get in now. They're not ranked 14th anymore. They're going to drop. I haven't seen the new poll yet, but they'll drop because they lost. Arizona State 28, BYU 23. Arizona State covered the 3 points that they were actually favored by being at home. So again, it was Arizona State 28, BYU 23. Just giving you a few of the college games. Ohio State kind of locked in on the Big Ten title with a 38-15 win over Indiana. Ohio State and Michigan coming up. That's one of the biggest rivalries in college football, along with probably the biggest Auburn, Alabama, then maybe Michigan, Ohio State. Florida, Georgia's up there in the top 3 to 5 also. In my mind, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. That's a huge game for me and Gator fans, Bulldog fans, and SEC fans. No doubt about it. Auburn, Alabama. Auburn and Alabama is, I hate to say this because I'm a Gator fan, but Auburn and Alabama is bigger, but not by much. By a little bit. Alabama and Auburn are two teams that are, man, Auburn beat Texas A&M, what was it, 43-41 in 4 overtimes. Auburn is thinking, man, we got a pulse. We don't have a very good record. We're 5-6, but we got our crack at Bama. Bama's got 3 losses now. Can you believe it? The big surprise of the weekend was Oklahoma 24, Alabama 3. How did Alabama only score 3 points? And Oklahoma got 24. I didn't even think they'd get that much in the game. But Oklahoma won at home. You never know with college football or even with the NFL from week to week to week. I picked Alabama, and I was wrong. Alabama was a freaking 13.5-point favorite at Oklahoma, and they lose the game 24-3. Is DeBoer, the coach at Bama, in trouble? Who did Alabama lose to? They beat Georgia. But they lost to Vandy. They lost to Tennessee, and now they've lost to Oklahoma. And Tennessee's probably going to make the playoff, and Tennessee's probably going to make the playoff because they beat Bama. That's one of the big reasons. Tennessee beat Florida in overtime. Now, if Florida wins that game, I think Billy should have gone ahead and gone for the 2 points. They were not going to win that night in Knoxville in overtime. Man, I wish he'd have gone for the 2 points and given it a shot. They weren't going to win it in overtime. They were about out of gas toward the end of the game. They lined up to go for 2 points. Tennessee called timeout, and then Florida decided to kick the extra point. I think that was a turning point for Florida in not a positive way. They took their chances in overtime, and they got beat up in overtime. The Tennessee win over Bama and the Tennessee win over Florida, those 2 wins propelled them into the playoff. I think it's going to be Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee. Those 3, and probably those 3 alone. Before a team gets in, I think it's pure ridiculousness. I think if there's a mid-major, even 1 or 2 mid-majors that are undefeated or have 1 loss, they should go ahead of 3 lost teams. This is a national playoff. This is not like, we're going to have a tournament with the SEC teams. We've already had the SEC title game, which Georgia's already in, by the way. Now, if you get into the SEC title game, you should be in the playoff. It's going to be Georgia and Texas, I believe, in the SEC title game. Assuming Texas beats, they got Texas A&M coming up. That might be tough, but Texas A&M's not playing maybe as well as they did earlier in the year. Texas A&M lost to who? South Carolina. They lost to Auburn. So Texas A&M is not trending in a position to make the playoff, but they could upset the apple cart if they could beat Texas. But that could happen, but probably won't. Texas, Georgia will decide the conference championship. I think it's going to be Texas and Georgia from what I understand. Georgia's already in. They've clinched a spot in the SEC title game. Tennessee's got a good record. We'll pull up the standings here in a minute, but let's do that. The heck, let's do that now. We're liable to forget and not pull it up. Look at how the SEC standings and college. Let's see what I mean, because I pulled the standings up the other day. We're going to take you around the NFL too. Jaguars did not lose. I saw a post on Facebook that had the Jaguars losing the bye week 30-14. I thought that was kind of funny. I sent the guy a note that posted that. I said, "Hey, let me see the stats to this game." They thought that was pretty hilarious. You can't lose the bye week, but they put a score up. Jaguars lose the bye week 30-14. They've lost most every other game. Jaguars are 2-9, as you know. Big games coming up this week. The Egg Bowl. The Egg Bowl. That should be called, in my opinion, it was his last win, the Egg Bowl. I think it should be changed to the Mike Leach Memorial Egg Bowl. I would love that. Everybody misses Mike Leach, former coach at Mississippi State. Mike Leach also coached Washington State. Mike coached at Texas Tech too, I believe, right? He was like a commander on a battlefield. And he was a funny guy in press conferences. I miss that guy that passed away a couple of years ago. His last game, he won the Egg Bowl. The Egg Bowl is coming up. Let's see, November 29th, Mississippi State at Ole Miss in the old Egg Bowl. I don't know what they call the Georgia Tech at Georgia game, but it's a pretty good rivalry. It's not as big as Florida, Georgia. It's not, but it is kind of it's a local thing in North Georgia, basically, or Georgia, throughout the state of Georgia. But it's a big rivalry. I'm sure the Florida Gator fans will tell you that Florida Georgia is a bigger rivalry than Florida State. But there's some games coming up. Listen to these games: Mississippi State at Ole Miss, November 29th. Georgia Tech at Georgia. Georgia Tech is 7-4. Georgia, now they don't want to stumble against the Bumblebees because all of a sudden then they've got 3 losses overall, right? Something like that. Georgia has lost how many? Let's pull the standings up. These are good games. Mississippi State at Ole Miss. Georgia Tech at Georgia is a 7:30 game on November the 29th. Tennessee at Vandy on November the 30th at 12 noon. Boy, that's an early one for that. It used to be usually always a night game, it seems like, for some reason. Here's a big one, too. Louisville at Kentucky. That's a 12 noon kickoff on November the 30th. So those are some big games coming up. Then you got Florida State. SEC standings. Now, I could sit here and elaborate on how many. I think this team's lost that many, but let's pull up the official standings. Texas is 10-1 overall. They're going to be in the playoff. The only way Texas would not be in the playoff if all of a sudden they lose to Texas A&M and Georgia, but I think they still get in because by virtue of getting to the SEC championship game, that should probably in most cases get both teams in. Just thinking out loud here, I think there's a difference between losing 2 regular season games opposed to losing an SEC title game. You lose your 3rd game in postseason. That's a little bit different than losing 3 games in the regular season. Because these SEC teams are beating each other up. Like they said years ago, the SEC would beat each other up and they'd never win the national championship. Whoever said that back in the early 1990s was wrong. Because Tennessee won a national title with T. Martin. Florida Gators won a national championship with Coach Steve Spurrier and Danny Werfel. And Urban Meyer won a couple of national titles in the SEC with the Florida Gators with Tim Tebow and Chris Lake. But taking a look, moving back ahead to where we are in 2024. Can you believe we're in 2024? Texas is on a 4-game winning streak. Georgia's won a couple in a row. Tennessee won their last game, and Tennessee's 9-2. Unless Tennessee stumbles against Vanderbilt, and that's always possible. Vanderbilt is going to be in a bowl game. Vanderbilt is what, 6-5? Man, I tell you, Vandy will give Tennessee all they want. especially if Tennessee gets off to one of their patented slow starts offensively. Here's an interesting stat. Tennessee is 7-0 at home. 7-0 at home. Tennessee beat Florida in overtime. Coach Billy Napier, I think your biggest mistake this year was not going for two. You lined up like you were going to go for two. Tennessee called timeout, and you decided to kick the extra point, went and took a chance in overtime. And I don't think the chances were good on Florida winning in overtime. On the road, seems like Florida played good early in the game, and they were kind of running out of gas toward the end. I think Billy should have gone for the kill. Can you imagine the headline if Florida had to beat Tennessee in overtime? Can you imagine the headline? Then you'd finally see it. Coach Billy Napier. Scared money don't make money. And you would have seen that headline for sure. If Florida had gone for two and got it and beat Tennessee up in Knoxville, but they lost in overtime. And right now we'd be talking about a 7-win Florida team. But now at this juncture, they're looking for that 7th win against Florida State. Texas A&M now, they've had a good year, but they're 8-3, 3 regular season losses. South Carolina's been hot. They won 5 in a row. They're 8-3 overall, 5-3 in the conference. Alabama is 8-3 overall, 4-3 in the conference. Ole Miss is 8-3 overall. LSU 7-4 overall. Missouri is quietly 8-3, but I don't think they're that good. Florida is 6-5. Arkansas 6-5, 3-4 in the conference. So Florida's 4-4 in the conference. Auburn 5-6 overall. Mississippi State way down at the bottom, 0-7 in the conference, and 2-9 overall. What it looks like to me, unless this thing's just going to get completely out of control and there's going to be more than 3 teams from the SEC in this first inaugural 12-team playoff setup, I see it as Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee, and that should be it, assuming Tennessee beats Vanderbilt. Now I could see this scenario. If Tennessee gets beat by Vanderbilt, Texas A&M beats Texas. I think Texas A&M could get in with 3 losses by virtue of beating Texas. Georgia beat Texas. That's Texas. The only loss for Texas was against Georgia. And it looks like the 2 teams are going to play again in the SEC title game. Boy, Texas wants revenge in that one, right? And I'm sure in the 12-team playoff it'll come down. Whoever wins the SEC title game, they're going to get a better seed. They'll be ranked higher. Georgia's got a chance to they got a chance to win the SEC title, and I think that's the most important thing prior to the playoff. So that's some of what we got kind of scanning over the SEC standings. I haven't done a new BigJReport.com SEC power rankings. I'm still trying to get the sand out of my eyes. Got a lot of sleep last night, but we're early in the morning, 6 o'clock hour. And our sponsors are on the ticker, Salsa Realty and Capital, the MadMaxMix.weebly.com, and Lakeview All the Hits. JC has a great Thursday night show live from the pub show. Mad Max is on Wednesday nights, the MadMaxMix.weebly.com. And Max, I'll try to get on there most every Wednesday night. We do interviews with Max. Usually in his last hour, we come on sometime during his last hour. I know there were interviews when we came on in the first hour, but now we're concentrating, I think, on the last hour of the show now. NFL football. I'm running out of time here. NFL football. Pittsburgh Steelers last Thursday. Cleveland Browns beat them 24-19. Minnesota Vikings escaped with a 30-27 win over the Chicago Bears, and I believe that was in overtime. The one game that really screwed up my pool and my survivor pick was Houston, and they lost. My survivor streak ended with 8 games. I think I'm still the leader in that, but somebody will probably catch me and pass me in the next couple of weeks in that. Because there's teams coming. There's players in the entrants, I should say, in the football pool that I think they've got a streak of maybe 6, and they win 2 or 3 more, and they'll win the survivor pool. Still enough games left for them to catch up. So one of the craziest games probably over the weekend was the Washington Commanders and Dallas Cowboys. You just never knew where that was going to end. Dallas won the game. Dallas Cowboys 34, Washington Commanders 26. That's really the only NFL game that I just sat down and watched for a while. And it was a good one. It was a good one, but it was a unique game. They had almost everything in the game, from punt returns, kickoff returns, turnovers, missed extra points. And when it looked like Dallas had the game, all of a sudden Washington completes a long touchdown pass they thought to tie the game, but the extra point was missed. I think it was the first extra point the kickers missed all year, and he missed it in a bad spot. Dallas won the game 34-26. Kansas City didn't cover, but they won. Kansas City Chiefs 30, Carolina Panthers 27. Houston Texans got beat by the Titans. This was the upset of the day. Tennessee Titans 32, Houston Texans 27. Giving the Dallas Cowboys 34, Washington Commanders 26. Kansas City Chiefs 30, Carolina Panthers 27. Giants got blasted. Can you believe they got blasted by Tampa Bay? And I picked the Giants in this one. Man, every time I pick Tampa Bay to lose, they win. Every time I pick them to win, they lose. They're not my favorite team as far as picking games. And Tampa Bay lost this one Tampa Bay won this one 31-7 over the Giants. Tampa Bay Buccaneers 31, New York Giants 7. Detroit Lions won. They didn't hang 50 on the Colts like they did the Jaguars. They beat the Jaguars 52-6, but they did convincingly beat the Colts. Detroit Lions 24, the Indianapolis Colts 6. Detroit may be the best team in the NFC. Green Bay beat the San Francisco team. San Francisco was without their starting quarterback, Brock Purdy, who's out with an injury. Green Bay won the game. Green Bay 38, San Francisco 10. Man. And I had picked San Fran to win that one. And Green Bay was a 2.5-point favorite. I picked Philadelphia. Philadelphia beat the Rams. Philadelphia Eagles 37, Los Angeles Rams 20. The battle of the Harbaughs, the Harbaugh Bowl on Monday night. Baltimore Ravens 30, LA Chargers 23. Did I miss any games? I think Seattle and Arizona was interesting. I did pick Seattle to win and cover at home, and they did. But it was a sluggish kind of game, defensive. One of my fantasy football leagues, I picked up the Arizona Cardinals at the last minute. And I'm glad I did. It helped me win my fantasy game in the Yahoo League. Because my Arizona Cardinals defense only gave up 16 points to Seattle. Seattle did win the game. Seattle Seahawks 16, Arizona Cardinals 6. The final score. Again, the Monday night game on Monday night, November the 25th. Battle of the Harbaugh brothers, Jim and John, right? Baltimore Ravens 30, LA Chargers 23. We did pick Baltimore to cover the 3-point spread they were favored by. This was not one of my better weeks in the pool. However, when it was all said and done, I was 4-3 in the colleges. I was 8-5 in the pros, and so I finished up a respectable 12 wins, 8 losses in the football pool. And I will not win this pool, but in the end, by getting Baltimore right, getting the Sunday night Eagles game right, I'm again headed toward the top of the pool, but will not win it. I heard there was a couple other people that looked like they were going to win it, and my name was not mentioned. But I had a decent week picking the games, 12-8. Colleges 4-3. There were 7 college games in this particular pool. I was 4-3. 8-5 picking the NFL games. And on the surface, I'm thinking, I did worse than that. And then I got to adding it back up, and I was 12 wins, 8 losses against the spread. That's going to do it for the Teal Shirt Report podcast this time around. My name's Scott, your host of the Teal Shirt Report podcast. Special thanks to our executive producer, JC, Also want to thank another producer, Alex Nunnery, and our contributor and correspondent, John Gaylor. Thank you guys very much. This has been the Teal Shirt Report podcast. And hey, I am out. You guys have a great day, okay?